Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Good morning and a very warm welcome to everyone. I am Manu Kashyapa from Advaita Academy. Let us begin with a small prayer. Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavatpada Shankaram Lokashankaram Sarvatma Sarvadrugyoso Sarvadhya Sanirasakrit Satatam Sannidhattam Me Hridaye Paramashivaha. Welcome to day 13 of Global Festival of Oneness 2021. As part of the ongoing festival, we bring you a pre-recorded special extra weekend session. Today, Annapurna Sarada presents different forms of Viveka as outlined in Vivekachudamani. For the benefit of our viewers, I would like to introduce Annapurna ji. Annapurna Sarada is the president of Sarada Ramakrishna Vivekananda associations in Hawaii and Portland. She was initiated by Swami Aseshanandaji of Ramakrishna Order and continues her study of Vedanta, Yoga, Sankhya, and other philosophical systems with Babaji Bob Kindler of Sarada Ramakrishna Vedanta associations. We welcome everyone. Please tune into the session and listen to the speaker. Thank you.
So in honor of Sri Shankara's birthday celebrations, which are upon us, let's begin with a chant from the Vivekachudamani. Om Shrutahe Shatagunam Vidyan Mananam Mananadapi Nidijasam Lakshagunam Anantam Nirvikalpakam. Hearing about Brahman is good. Better still is taking the teachings and contemplating those teachings of Brahman. Better yet is direct meditation upon Brahman. But infinitely greater than all is that meditation in which all doubts about the nature of reality, the union of Atman and Brahman, die away forever. Om, peace, peace, peace. So I'm very grateful to get to speak to everyone today. And this time, because this has been done before, I want to specifically direct the teachings to those in the West, and I guess because I'm an American, specifically to Americans. Shankaracharya is extremely important to all non-dualists in the West. But unlike our brothers and sisters in India, we do not begin with a culture that already understands the difference between the real and the unreal. We take the world to be real in and of itself, and we're attached to it. And most people in this country are not raised to think in multiple lifetimes. So when we hear these wonderful teachings, which have been coming to the United States for over 100 years now, teachings like, I am that meaning God or Brahman, or I am God, or everything is God, we're not prepared to hear it in quite the same way that our brothers and sisters in India would hear it. So the subject of this talk is, the subtitle of it is, in order to know who we are, we must know what we're not. And in the scripture, Vivekachudamani by Shankaracharya, he lays it out in a conversation between the teacher and the disciple, the student who has already prepared him herself by becoming calm, by becoming detached, by being peaceful, cultivating nonviolence, doing all work without attachment to the results, serving others. So this student in the Vivekachudamani has all of these qualities, and he's also in the know that there is something so far beyond this world that he wants to know how to realize that. Now, in the West, we think in terms of belief and we think in terms of faith, but we don't so often think in terms of direct experience. But in the East, religion and philosophy are both meant for direct experience. And what's meant by that? Direct experience is where we get beyond the intellectual frame of reference. We get beyond mere belief, and we have a direct perception. Just like the eyes are seeing what's before them, we have this internal, direct experience of God, of Brahman, of the indivisible soul, Atman. So we need teachings that show us how to make that connection and how to lead us beyond an intellectual frame of reference only. Now, this can sound very appealing. People sometimes think that book learning is no good, that too many ideas and philosophies will cloud the mind and stand as a barrier to that direct perception. But there's a misunderstanding here. There is what's called lower knowledge and higher knowledge. And the lower knowledge is all about things of the world. You know, they help us make a living. They help us get by in the world. They help us understand medicine and science and all these things. These are all useful, but they're all finite. Those scriptures that talk about, and those philosophies that talk about the nature of the self and of Brahman, the highest ultimate reality, and our relationship between the individual and the absolute, the relative and the absolute. This knowledge is essential. And so long as it's not engaged in with the idea of just becoming a knower of this higher philosophy, you know, is sort of a stimulation for the mind, an enjoyment or a delight for the mind. So long as it's engaged in to actually know the truth, we will make progress. And of course, what comes along with that is the need for holy company and the need of having a real teacher. So I'm already a little bit far afield of where I wanted to go. But let me begin with a quote from somebody who's known as a great commentator on Shankaracharya. And he's commenting on Shankara's works, his great works and actions. He describes it this way. Disciples are of two grades, those with impure minds, vyakula chitta, and those with pure minds, avyakula chitta. The first mind, the impure mind, is still endowed with bad tendencies, with passions and attachments, and also with wild and vain imaginings. The other kind of mind, the pure mind, has no such conceits. Even those born of learning and good conduct, in other words, even if one has good conduct, has learning, there is still humility and a detachment from that. It's not like my learning, my good actions. There's this detachment there. And they have no vanities. Such a one gains release even by a single hearing of the Vedanta texts. But the impure disciple has to cleanse the mind and make it one-pointed through the practice of yoga. Only thereafter will it get enlightened by hearing the Vedanta. So this idea of pure and impure in our culture is only understood in terms of being offensive to the morals and ethics of society. But this kind of pure and impure has to do with one's ability to meditate and efface the ego so that what is internal and what is external becomes one indivisible reality, just like Atman and Brahman are identical. And that is the final conclusion of the Vedanta. So Shankaracharya is extremely important to us. We need to know what he says, and the Vivekachudamani is an excellent scripture to begin with. We need to know that, it's good to hear this teaching that the Atman, the eternal self that's indivisible and is one with Brahman. We need to hear that. But to immediately jump, when we still have a mind that hasn't been purified, to immediately jump to say, I am Brahman. This self is Brahman. These are the great Mahavakyas of the Upanishads. To say that and then go about as if one believes oneself to be an individual is a kind of hypocrisy that we need to avoid. So there's another issue. Most Americans by far, well, most people by far, we're by and large householders, and we're out there earning a living. And this highest standpoint of Advaita in that context is very hard to maintain. So does that mean that we don't strive for it? No, it means that we learn how not to be a hypocrite with it. And by knowing these different teachings of discrimination between what's real and what's unreal, what is the self and what is not the self, what is the Atman and what is not the Atman, by knowing those and rolling it through our minds to the point where no matter what we say, no matter what we apply this I to, there's a part of us in the back that goes, yes, okay. That's not applied to the Atman. That's applied to the un-Atman, the non-Atman. And I'm just associating this eternal I with that. So for example, all right, everybody here knows we're not the body, right? So we're not the body. Now, maybe that is just an intellectual understanding. And we also cherish the idea that this self and Brahman are identical, right? But as soon as we say that, and then we go out and say something like, I'm going to the store, or I feel sick, or I'm thirsty, or wow, didn't I do a good job on that? As soon as we do all of that, we're not in that, that is counter. We have in every single one of those statements associated the I, which should only refer to the Atman, with everything but the Atman, with everything but Brahman. But what about all is Brahman? Here in the West, so many people, whether they're with teachers or not, they've heard that statement that all is Brahman. That is true. But it's from the highest standpoint. And it isn't all Brahman until we realize that it is Brahman. Just like we're not the Atman until we realize we're the Atman. So we have to take these steps. We have to be practical. Now, there's something else that's out there, a statement that goes like this, that says, you are already that, meaning Brahman or Atman. There isn't anything you need to do. Go out there and be free. Be at peace. Now, how many of us can really do that, right? So it's not that that statement is untrue. It's just that it's delivered at the highest state. Because we are the Atman. There isn't any practice, and I'll read a quote from Shankara here in a minute. There isn't any practice that we can do that will turn us into the Atman. There isn't any kind of purification that we can undergo that will turn us into the Atman. We are already that, but the mind stands in the way. This Atman that we are is covered over by Tamas. Shankaracharya speaks of that as the covering power. This tamas, it's one aspect of the modes, the ingredients of Maya, and it covers the nature of reality and makes it possible for Rajas to come and distort that and project something else. We've all heard the story of the anecdote of the rope and the snake. All right, Thomas comes and veils our understanding, and instead of seeing a rope, it's covered. We don't know what it is. And so Rajas gets in there. I'm speaking very simply here. Rajas gets in here and makes it look like a snake to us. And we see it as a snake. We can't unsee it as a snake until we wake up from that. And that's sattva, this prakasha, this luminosity, this revealing power. And in that state, the snake goes away and the rope is seen for what it is. So these are different kinds of discriminations. So back to that idea that we have to, there's nothing that we can do that will make the Atman exist. It already exists, but there is something we have to do in the mind and in our practice to take away the ignorance. And this is done through discrimination. So let me read some quotes by Shankara. He says here, a buried treasure is not uncovered by merely uttering the words, come forth. You must follow the right directions. Dig, remove the stones and earth from above it, and then make it your own. In the same way, the pure truth of the Atman, which is buried under Maya and the effects of Maya, can be reached by meditation, contemplation, and other spiritual disciplines such as a knower of Brahman may prescribe, but never through subtle arguments, right? So subtle arguments here. We can't just reason. We have to go beyond reason. And yet, like Holy Mother says, we have to take this mind all the way to Brahman with us. So the right directions. In the context of this teacher-student relationship, this is hearing what the teacher says about how we should engage the teachings in our mind. And when we have obstacles, going to the teacher and explaining what we're experiencing and having the teacher give us more insight into it so that we can walk this path on our own. So this Atman, which he says is buried under Maya and the effects of Maya. So Maya, it's made of the three gunas. Its powers are in the three gunas. And when those go out of equilibrium, we have the whole phenomenal universe. Most of the people here are familiar with the 24 cosmic principles, things like earth, air, fire, water, and ether, the 5 senses of, well, the 10 senses, and so forth and so on, including the mind. These are all ways of discriminating between what is changing and what is unchanging. This is something else that in the Vivekachudamani, Shankaracharya points out, that all this phenomena, all this unreal is the changing. So the teacher is going to help us pull apart, tease apart this changing phenomena from the unchanging Atman. And as we roll the teachings in our mind, we gain the capacity to do this more and more deeply on our own. So Shankaracharya goes on, the next verse after what I read was, therefore the wise must personally exert all their powers to get liberation from the bondage of the world, just as they would personally take medicine to overcome a disease. So this is a really important point. We have to do this ourselves. They say, it is said that the teacher, a real teacher, can dispel our bondages. But it's almost more a matter of pointing them out so that we can walk the path. We need to have this experience ourselves. And Shankara, in other parts of the Vivekachudamani, says more about this, that we cannot rely on we can trust the realizations of others, but we have to have that realization for ourselves. Nobody else can have that realization for us. So this is a very important point, and why a good teacher will not only point out what's in our way, but will inspire us, empower us with the idea that we can do this. We can achieve this realization. So Americans want to do things fast, right? We're used to fast food. We're used to not waiting for our music. You know, we don't have to go to stores anymore. We can just push a button and stream it out of our computers. We think that, you know, we can piece together a spiritual path out of bits and bobs of other traditions. And this is not very effective. It's not working well for us if we really understand what the nature of reality is. So there's a sector of society who thinks that spirituality is actually feeling good, right? It's if the body feels good, that's the feeling of spirituality. If my emotions are happy and joyful, you know, I'm having a good time. I have a nice floaty, inspirational feel listening to kirtan music. Now, I'm not saying this to people who are sincerely and deeply involved in kirtan and who are also practicing meditation and study of scripture and have a teacher and a lineage. I'm talking to those who don't have those things and are cheating themselves of the highest understanding and the highest reality by thinking that the experience is what's real instead of the experiencer. If what we're experiencing fades away, then it's not ultimately real. So Shankara says, neither by the practice of yoga or of Sankhya philosophy, nor by good works, nor by lower knowledge does liberation come, but only through realization that Atman and Brahman are one, in no other way. And so this refers to that direct experience. This direct experience is where that line between the individual and the absolute begins to thin out. It's more than intellectual understanding. And if we're not verging on this direct experience of Atman and Brahman are one, all these other experiences that we're having that feel good are not going to get solidified in our character. We have to go from mere sattva, enjoyment of phenomena, and a mere peaceful feeling that comes and goes, to what's called sattva shuddha, where we abide in this highest sattva and in, you know, these high teachings. So one of the things that happens, I need to move along here, but I just also want to add that when we hear these Mahavakyas, we have to be, I want to repeat this, we have to be careful to not use that I that says, I am Brahman, or this self is Brahman, etc., or I am that. To not relegate this I to anything in phenomena, but only to the Atman. So when we're contemplating it, it's not an ego that's feeling this, that we have to go beyond the ego. Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead now and I'm going to show a chart, but we're going to talk about the methods of discrimination now. So in the Vivekachudamani, Shankaracharya lays out a whole host of them, right? He begins with the body and discriminating about the body. And then what does the body consist of? And then he talks about the subtle body, and then he talks about the causal body. So we're going to talk about this, but it's also important to know that when we hear these teachings, when we get them out of the Advaitic texts, and we hear them from teachers who are schooled in the Advaita Vedanta philosophy, that there is an assumption that we already know what the 24 cosmic principles are, that we already and recognize them as something other than the self, okay? And that we already have in our minds delineated the 5 senses of perception and the 5 senses of action, and that we know about the tanmatras, which are the subtle, rudimentary elements before earth, air, fire, water, and ether come about. You know, they're more like, they're mental particles, right? And they also assume that we know about the fourfold mind, that there's one mind that operates in 4 different ways, because he's going to talk about that. And when we list all these different things, it's like knowing, oh, wow, if I'm looking at that, if I'm observing that, if I'm conceptualizing that and identifying myself with that, then I'm identifying myself with the unreal. And I have to not do that. I have to let that go. And instead identify with the witness self, with the Atman. So this is important to know. There's no way in this little short 45-minute class that we're going to be able to go through all of those different kinds of aspects of discrimination. We're going to jump to something bigger that includes all of those. And I encourage everybody to study deeply and with a teacher, the Vivekachudamani by Shankaracharya. So Shankaracharya says in verse 122, let me back up here to verse 69. Of the steps to liberation, the first is declared to be complete detachment from all things which are non-eternal. Then comes the practice of tranquility, self-control, and forbearance. And then the entire giving up of actions which are done from personal selfish desire. Now, Shankaracharya is, on the most part, he's speaking to somebody headed for a monastic lifestyle. But this is absolutely something that householders can do. And we should engage in this. This will bring peace. Complete detachment from all things which are non-eternal. This detachment is not callousness. It is simply becoming the witness, simply recognizing it changes. And the self within never changes. And from that, then we practice tranquility of mind, peacefulness of mind, self-control and forbearance. So then this detachment from the non-eternal comes about via this discrimination, this discernment. But we have to know what is non-eternal. And I've been mentioning it all along the way. Repetition is good. But here's Shankaracharya's statement on it. The body, organs, pranas, mind, ego, all the modifications and objects of sense experience, all pleasure and pain, the 5 elements, all the universe, and what's called the avyaktam, the undifferentiated, the unmanifested. These are all the non-self. It is all Maya. from the undifferentiated, unmanifested nature to the individual body. It is unreal and the non-self. And we are to know this as water in a mirage. Just like we see a mirage in the desert, and we see that water shimmering, we know it's not real. And we can do this, even as householders. We can develop, we can cultivate this ability to look upon phenomena and lovingly as just something changing, as a shimmering of water in a mirage. You know, and this is where we would typically bring up my teacher, Swami Aseshanandaji, who would say that renunciation is not condemnation, it's deification. So when we really key into the eternal existence of the self, whose nature is existence, knowledge, and bliss, absolute, that bliss is identical with real love at the highest level, then we know that everything has come out of that. Yeah, it's the changing phenomena, but everything has come out of that, and there isn't anything to fear about it. And so this detachment then that we cultivate in our families and with our children and our relatives and with our co-workers, in the end, we should know that it is all to be based in this love of reality, because everything is shot through and through with that. But in order to know that, again, we have to peel it all away so we can see that reality. So the states of the body. So we're going to start now with the body, because that's the first thing he says that deludes us. And isn't it so? We take embodiment, we have an incarnation into a physical body, and from the beginning, we've got to learn how to use this thing. And our parents are telling us, oh, you're so cute, right? And etc. And so there's all this reinforcement that we're a body. Exactly. How many of us here in the United States have been put up against a door jamb and told that we're growing? You know, a little line is marked there, and this is how old you were at 3 years, how big you were at 3 years old. Here you are at 10, right? You know, it's just all this reinforcement that we're the body. Now we have to undo this. So Shankaracharya is there to do that with us. The states of the body are existence, birth, growth, change, decay, and death. Fatness or thinness, caste or one's position in society, color, creed, ignorance or learning, different diseases, respect, insult, all these belong to the body, right? Somebody walks up to you and says, I don't like you. They don't mean your soul. They mean your body. You know, or you're fat. All they see is this external thing. It's not you, right? So, or, oh, you're so amazing, you know, and you're decked out in sequins or something. That's all due to the body, right? So let me show this. Let me show you now that chart that I mentioned. And I'm afraid I don't have it perfectly set up here. Hopefully this will, oops, sorry. Let me try that again. There we go. All right. So this is the gross body. It's the first thing that deludes us. And it's composed of marrow, bones, fat, flesh, blood, skin, and nails. And all of that is made out of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. They combine to create the sense objects, which includes the body. Think about that. This body is a sense object. It's an object of the senses, as well as of the mind, which, of course, senses are in the mind. And it has the 5 organs of action, things like speaking and handling, locomotion, excreting, procreation. And here's the quote that I just read earlier, that existence and non-existence belong with the body. Birth, growth, change, disease, decay, death, caste or position in society, color, creed, ignorance and learning, fatness and thinness, respect and insult, all of that has to do with the gross body. We really don't want to be that. It's okay as a vehicle for consciousness, but it's not okay as the self. So now let me read his next quote and bring this up. His next quote is that I'm going to share. He's actually got quite a few, but I'm just choosing one of each. Between the self and the subtle body. So here's the discrimination between the self and the subtle body, which is made of 8 cities. He says, the subtle body is with desire, and it feels action done. It feels that these belong to itself because it is ignorant of its real nature. So the body, the gross body and the subtle body are both superimpositions over the soul. And now let me share that screen again. Oops. It's called the Sukshma Sharira. And this is something else that we as Americans mostly don't hear about. We only know about the physical body, and in many cases, we're taught to think that the brain and the mind and the soul are all the same thing, if we even believe in a soul. So in Indian philosophy, and Shankaracharya spells this out in great detail, we have a gross body, a subtle or mental body, and then we even have what's called a causal body. So this subtle body is very important to know, because when we start putting more of our attention on higher pursuits, then we're really dealing even more with the mind. And, and when we talk about feeling happy or sad or depressed, we're talking about the mind. So this subtle body consists of the mind observed in these 4 different ways: as the intellect, as the ego, as thought, and as dual mind. It also consists of those 5 subtle elements that are the rudimentary parts of the gross elements, what we think of as space, water, earth, etc. Or if you want to think of it in terms of chemistry, the periodic table of elements, I think it's called. What is it that makes those, right? So these tanmatras are subtle. Swami Vivekananda says only the yogi can see them. And they are given names that refer to the potential for sound, the potential for touch, the potential for sight, the potential for flavor, the potential for odor. So all of those exist in the mind. And the mind projects it out so that we're in the gross body, we get the experience with the gross objects that are external to us of experiencing fragrance and the touch of things, its roughness or smoothness. Remember, all these experiences are the non-self. How many times a day, how many times an hour even, do we just get lost in sensory perception? We need to become the witness of that. Say, oh, okay, then also there's the 5 senses of knowledge. So we experience them in the gross body through the eyeball, through the ears, etc. But the actual organ and power of those senses are these gyanendriyas, the five senses of knowledge. So smelling, tasting, seeing, touching, and hearing. And then the five pranas. So excretory, ascension, digestive, inhalation, circulatory. Now, all of these make up the subtle body. And one of the ways we can think about that is that the subtle body is associated with our dream state. And if you think about your dreams, you'll see that you're using all of these in your dream. So this is a way of kind of getting a handle on it, because as Americans, as Westerners, we don't grow up with these ideas. We're lucky to even know about the five senses. So there's another aspect of this, that ignorance is a part of this body, that covering power that we were talking about. And kama and karma, desire and action. So all of our desires from past lifetimes, from current lifetimes, what's called samskaras, our inherent tendencies, our karmas, our past actions that are coming into fruition in this life and future lives, these are all part of the subtle body. So this is another teaching that we use to discriminate between the self and the non-self. Every single one of these aspects is the non-self. Now, what are these characteristics that are part of the subtle body? Conceptualization. So conceptualization is not the self. Happiness, misery, these are not the self. They belong to the subtle body. They belong to the ego. Blindness, deafness, dumb, being unable to speak, breathing, yawning, hunger, thirst, secretion, arriving and departing the body. These are all characteristics of the subtle body. And these all change. The Atman never changes. Atman and Brahman are stationary, immutable. That's a great word, immutable. Why? It's all pervasive. So how can it change? How can it go anywhere? How can it transform? So again, these are ways of discrimination. So we're reaching the end of our time. There's just one more, and there's not a whole lot to say about it, but there's a whole lot to contemplate about it. And this is the causal body. It's the avyaktam. Remember, Shankaracharya said that everything from avyaktam, this unmanifested or undifferentiated state of matter, all the way down to the individual body, is the non-self. The intellect ceases to vibrate there, but it's still the non-self. And it's where the three gunas rest in equilibrium. So let me just take a quick look at my notes and see. We're going to jump now. So let's say that we have become not just conversant, but accomplished and successful with this practice of discrimination between the self and the non-self. What happens when we do that? What's left? What are we left with? In verse 124, Shankaracharya says, "Now I shall speak about the nature of your real self, knowing which one becomes free from all bondage and enjoys the state of isolation, of being alone, of oneness." Now that isolation, to the American ear, that sounds like, oh my God, I'm going to be lonely. But it's the awe. It's the true I in fullness. Anyway, he goes on in verse 133, describing this wondrous self in which all desire ceases, all dissatisfaction ceases. He says that he is the knower of the self, the mind in its transformations, of the body, the senses, the pranas and their actions. It's the stable, immutable witness of all those changes, of all transformations. He says, as fire in a ball of iron, that self works in all these and does not undergo any change. So just like we have a cold lump of iron and it's been heated by fire, we then say that that heated ball of iron is hot, but the heat belongs to the fire alone and not to that iron ball. The fire doesn't change, but we're looking at that steel ball that appears to be changing. And then he goes on, he, the Paramatman, the Supreme Atman, is never born, never dies. He neither increases nor decreases, nor changes. He is eternal, beyond all transformations of nature. Pure intelligence is his nature. Existence and non-existence spring from the Paramatman, who is the witness of all of it. So I hope with this that people are inspired to take up this great scripture and the other scriptures of Shankaracharya, find a competent teacher to help you understand it in its truest sense, so that contemplation of the teachings will be direct and swift and take us to the goal of human existence. So, Jai Shankaracharya ki Jai. Om Drishyam Pratitam Pravilapayan San Sanmatram Anandaganam Vibhavayam Samahita Sanbahir Antaramba Kalam Nayataha Sati Karma Bande. Brahman is an inexpressible mass of pure, conscious, blissful awareness. Thus, taking what appears to us as internal and external, render them into one indivisible state. Meditate upon that state. Pass your time contentedly and be free. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all living beings. Om, Hari Om, Tat Sat.
Thank you, Annapurna Sarada ji, for that wonderful lessons that you shared with us from the Vivekachudamani. And from the entire team of Advaita Academy, we thank you immensely for sharing us this recording in your absence. Viewers, thank you for joining us today. With this, we conclude yet another session of Global Festival of Oneness. In the evening session, we have Swamini Brahma Prajnananda Saraswati ji, who will be speaking on Vedanta and psychology with special references to Shankara's Upadesha Sahasri. Please tune into the session. If you have not registered, please register from our website. You can also tune into our social media platforms for registrations. And there is also an important announcement for sadhakas and seekers. Indica Renaissance Fund is very much pleased to announce a scholarship scheme of 50% of the fees payable for 6 selected sadhakas. I urge all the seekers and sadhakas to make use of this wonderful opportunity. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.